Is everybody okay to begin? So, good morning to everybody. So we are now here to discuss about how we can change the dialogue about gender in Africa. Why is progress being made so slowly in Africa, and what can be done to change this? I think before introducing the panelists, just a quick words. I personally wonder whether this progress is that slow, and I would be happy to hear the panelists about this, because I do think that quite a lot of progress is really being made. Maybe it's an unequal progress, but it's an amazing progress, and I hope that we are going to talk about this. Now, what can we do to change or to strengthen this dialogue, which is, do we need to introduce other people to talk with? Do we need to talk not only to women but also to men, to young boys? Do we need to talk not only to government but also to civil society, to business people? What are we going to talk about? Do we have to change the narrative that's being said about Africa in general and gender in Africa? What are the specific gender issues in Africa, if there are specific gender issues? So I think these are the different and very interesting questions we're here to discuss together. So let me please begin by introduce our panelists. I'm very impressed by our panelists, I must say. I'm very shy about introducing them. Please complete me if I'm wrong about what I'm saying about you. So first I will begin with Ibukan Awosike, who is an Awosika, who is, how could I describe you, which won't be the complete picture, but I would say you are an entrepreneur, mainly. And you had, I must say, a very interesting career, because you began by chemistry, then you wanted to be a lawyer, then you went to be an accountant, then you went into furniture business. So I really think it's a very interesting path that you made. What led you to this? And also you have promoted a very specific facility to help address a big issue now on the African continent, which is the gap between education and youth and employability. So I think this is a very important issue, dealing with education without employment prospects, or with not enough employment prospects in Africa. Theo Sowa, then. Now, Theo, you are, shall I say, a philanthropist? It's probably not enough. African philanthropist. Civil, so you're all philanthropists. We're all philanthropists. But, I mean, this would be your core business now? And you are now the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund, but you have quite a lot of other things. And you specifically studied and worked on the impact of war on children, which is also, I would say, a specific issue for the African continent. Patricia Ito, if I say you're corporate, it's probably not enough, but still I'm trying to find a word. And you are presently working, heading East Africa L'Oréal. So that's really an interesting place to talk about gender issues in Africa. Letty Chiwawa. Letty Chiwawa is an international diplomat. You are actually regional director of the Africa division at UN Women. And all your life, if I understand, you've been fighting to make sure that African women voices were being heard at international level. And you too have focused, you're focusing on quite a lot of issues, but violence against women is one of your interest and topics. And now Wendy Luhabe. Wendy has been described to me as the most accomplished business icons in Africa. So I'm sorry, I have to say it. don't, don't begrudge me. It's not me. It's just what I'm reading. And you have made quite a lot of different things, which I'm sure you will describe much better than I do. I was struck by two things. You, in 1996, you wrote a book called Defining Moments. I was wondering whether it's better to have moments than people to change. I mean, have you been driven by moments rather than people? Because I know that you are working on mentorship too. Yeah. No, but it's an interesting one. Is it moments that change people or the reverse? I mean, the dynamic is a strong one. And the second thing is bridging the gap that you have been working on between education and employment. And there too, I was having another question, which is, how do we bridge the gap, specifically for women, between dreams, ambitions, and realizations? So thank you very much. Maybe the best thing to begin with for the first 40 minutes is to have each one of the panelists telling us what is the most important for them in this different issue. So I'll give the floor to you. Shall we begin in that order? Because I don't know. Ebukan, are you happy to begin?
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to listen to us. What is most important for me? It will be everything, really. And when I say that, I say it with a great sense of purpose. Because what would be most important for me would be to find the average African, male or female, but because this is a specific issue for women, that the average African woman, starting from the girl child, finds the space and the environment to fully express herself, her ambitions, her dreams, her passion, to play to win with her entire life. I have a personal vision, and my personal vision is to die empty. And every time I say that, people wonder what I mean. But I mean that the day I die, my epitaph has to have, here lies a life that has totally used up every talent, ability, or grace that she has to benefit humanity and to change the world in the way that she could have. I would want that to be something that every woman, young, middle-aged, old African, can work with and have the space to run with. Now, how do we do that? It's not about government, it's not just about NGOs, it's not just about organizations or CSRs of companies. It will be about every single person being involved in the process. So really, when we're talking about the table, we're talking about getting all on board, getting everybody involved in the process. From the father who understands that in taking decisions concerning women at whatever level he is, he's taking decisions concerning his wife, his daughter, his granddaughter, his sister, his friend's daughter, and whatever else is female around him. From the woman who has the opportunity to facilitate and takes decisions that ultimately she must realize can come round back to her. We all have a part to play in this. And how we design this to solve the problem, for me, is about how we get everybody to admit they're part of the value chain and to take responsibility for it in order to cause the change that we need. That, for me, will be fundamental. Thank you.
It's very hard to follow that. What I'm going to do is just actually link on a little bit to what you've just said, because I think that if we are talking about changing the dialogue. One of the things that I think is really important is that issue of how we get everybody involved. And it's not just about getting everybody involved, but it's also about coming to a recognition about an integrated approach. That if we continue saying that we're only going to deal with gender in a silo and we're not going to look at it in the whole, then we're never going to change fast enough, because men and women and children, etc., don't live in silos. They're not only about education or only about empowerment or only about economics. So I'd really like to, I think it's really important to have everybody involved in the dialogue, but also to have everybody recognizing that the dialogue has to be holistic, which links back into African traditions of who people are, that we are whole beings, spiritual, intellectual, etc. I think the other thing I wanted to say in terms of importance is that if we're going to look at changing the dialogue about gender in Africa, then I think it's really important for African women to start documenting and writing about the change we want to see and the change that we are seeing. Because we have to tell our own stories, because nobody else is telling our stories, and they're not telling our stories in the way that we see them. And so I think that whole area about actually changing the narrative has to start from us, because otherwise we'll always be complaining that it's not good enough.
Okay, I will lead on from that discussion around documenting and what we stand for. And I think for me, my example or the message I want to leave is the power of role models. In Africa, the one thing that most people follow or look up to, especially as women, is somebody who they see has done it, can achieve what they want to achieve, and does it in a way that they find very aspirational. So for me, the message I'd like to give this morning as we follow on about documentation is how each one of us as individuals, as women, the example we set as role models in whatever we do. And it's not going to be, if you're as a mother, as I'm a corporate person, so I'll talk from my experience as a corporate person, as philanthropist, as entrepreneur, how are we really living as role models, which then give this aspiration, which then give everybody the courage, and the women of Africa the courage that they can be what they want to be. And I'll just talk a little bit about then what I want to leave. My legacy for me has always been being a very strong, having worked all my life in the corporate multinational world. The legacy I'd like to leave is that as women, we actually can have it all. And when I say we can have it all, is that traditionally the sense has been that as women, you're not going to get beyond a certain point. Why? Because traditionally as Africans, we still have the expectation that you have to manage the home, and the home is not just you and your immediate family. The home is you, your in-laws, children, and everybody else. That's your responsibility. You're going to do a full-time job, and when you come home, you're still going to be asked, has the shopping been done? Has this happened for the children? Your mother-in-law is sick. Can you please take her to the hospital? And the importance for me is how we, as we get into positions of leadership, how we create an environment that allows women to succeed despite the responsibility which they'll always carry. And when I look at an organization that I'm in, which is L'Oreal, I set up the subsidiary there. 65% of my staff right now is women. Yeah, and one of the things that I try and encourage is an environment that allows them to be who they are and not feel that they have to be one thing or the other. Either I'm going to be a corporate person or I have to be, but I can't have it all. When I look again at some of the statistics which really exist in the corporate world, teams which have both men and women always deliver better. And again, creating those role models. At L'Oreal, if we look at the teams that, the scientific teams, the ones which have a higher balance of women deliver more patents. So what does that say? That women can do it and they can succeed. And how are we going to document, as Theo says, these stories and continue to be these role models, which then allow women to feel that actually I can have it all. I see somebody who's done it, and I can have it all. So I wouldn't say the gender around women is slow. It is happening. The challenge is it is not being told. The stories are not being shared, and these role models are not out there so that people can see that I can have it all. So that's a message I'd like to leave.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and good morning to everybody. I think the dialogue we're having here, for me, is a dialogue that begs the question, do we really need to change the dialogue on gender in Africa? Why I'm saying so is because over the past 2 days, we've all been listening and acknowledging that Africa is on the rise in terms of Africa's economic growth, Africa's leadership in various areas. And one of the things that I'm also seeing, and that is reality, is while Africa is on the rise in terms of economic growth, so are African women on the rise. We are beginning to see right now in Africa more women getting into position of leadership. 30 years ago, it was undreamable when we were in the first Women's World Conference in Mexico in 75. Nobody dreamt that Africa would have an elected female president, but today we do. And now we have 2, and we even have more. And 50 years ago, when the African Union was established as we never thought, and it was never dreamt, that organization would be led by a woman. Today we have the chair of the African Union as a woman. So I think we're really on the rise as African women. And having said so, even as we are dialogue or discussing the economical rise of Africa, we have to now look at the second equation to that rise. Who is contributing to that rise? Is it the men? Is it the women? Is it both? And in my opinion, women are actually contributing more than 50% of that rise. The only challenge we have in Africa, which I think is where we should be discussing, are we counting enough the contribution of all women in Africa to the growth of Africa or to the rise of Africa? And why I say so is because many of the women in Africa live in rural areas. Many of the women, and they are tilling the land, they are in agriculture, they are producing the much needed food, they are making sure the children go to school. And who is counting their contribution to the economic growth of Africa? Many of the women are in the informal sector. We all heard these statistics in the last 2 days, and I'm not going to repeat them. Women in the informal sector, women in the markets. There are so many women who are contributing to this. And for me, if I go back to the point that Ibukun raised earlier on, if I was to die today, what would I want people to describe me as? Or what is the legacy I want to leave when I go? For me, it's the legacy of she has fought a winning war because she has made sure that the contribution of African women was on the map. And she has ensured that women of all walks of life from Africa were known and recognized and their contribution counted. So I really want to leave that as I go. I want that to be the legacy. And I believe African women are on the rise. And this is the time for African women.
Good morning. I'm always struck by the notion that human beings only use 5% of their potential. So like Ibukan, I also want to be thoroughly used up when I die. So we share a similar point of view. I was also struck by the reference of this question to women in Africa, because I think it's a question that applies to women everywhere. But then I assume that the reference to Africa is premised on the fact that Africa tends to be more of a traditional and a patriarchal society. And what that means for me is that prejudice and discrimination against women tends to be embedded and institutionalized a lot more than it is in other parts of the world, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I'm going to respond to the questions really speaking for women everywhere, because I think that the issue of how we change the dialogue about women applies to women in all parts of the world. Fundamentally, I think that the way that we change the dialogue for me is, and it's the area of my life that I have been involved in, it really is about making sure that women have economic rights, whatever that means in society. When women do not have economic independence or financial independence, they compromise a lot in their lives. They stay in relationships that no longer work because they don't have options. So I think that one of the major areas of how we change the dialogue is about how we extend economic rights to women. But more importantly, we have to start with our own perception of ourselves as women, about what our role and what our contribution in society needs to be. I often feel that we allow other people to define who we are and what our role and what our contribution should be in society. And I think we need to claim that position and define for ourselves what we really feel needs to change for women to assume their rightful place in society. Secondly, we bring up children. And I feel very strongly that the way that we bring up children in the world has to change. We have to bring up children differently. We have to teach them to accept that both men and women are created equal, but that we have different qualities. We approach life differently, we have different contributions to make. And this is an affirmation that I think as mothers, we have a responsibility to impart on our children, so that we don't sit in Deauville and try and rectify problems that we could have rectified when children were growing up, when children are young. We have a comment in Africa, in Xhosa, that says, umti ugotywa usemtsha, meaning that it's easier to shape a tree whilst it's still a young tree and the branches. The branches are still soft and you can mold them. So I would recommend that this is something that as women, clearly we cannot abdicate the responsibility to bring up women. I think that as we pursue our aspirations, I'm certainly not suggesting that we should abdicate what we do about bringing up children in the world. I think we need to define, and that's why I started by saying it's important that we claim the position to define what our role needs to be in society and how we integrate those roles in a way that is suitable to us, that is convenient to us. Thirdly, the education system is absolutely critical. It plays a huge role in reinforcing some of the stereotypes, some of the gender stereotypes that we really struggle with in society. So I want to submit that the education system has a role to play in how it transforms negative gender stereotypes. For example, we heard, I think yesterday in one of the panels, about a girl that went to school and was asked or was told by a teacher that accounting or engineering or finance would be too difficult for a girl. I mean, how irresponsible is that? So I think we need to look at the role that the education system plays in reinforcing the gender stereotypes that exist in society. Fourth, I think that children's books have to portray women in different roles, from subservient roles. There's a lot that is passed on subliminally in the books that we read as young kids, that portray young boys as heroes and young girls in subservient roles. So I think we need to pay attention to what are the messages that we're passing on to children as they are growing up. Fifth, we have to stop trying to be like men. We have to be ourselves and find the courage of our own voices in society. Trying to be like a man is a tough job, really. I wouldn't know how to do it, you know, notwithstanding that I can't change my equipment, for lack of a better description. So I just think that we serve the world best when we can be women. Let's just bring all our femininity to the world, because that's the contribution that we bring to the world. Finally, we have to participate in public debate and discourse in society. Women are doing a lot, as the rest of the panelists have suggested, but our voices are not heard in public discourse. We don't write, we don't have opinions. We are just, we are invisible. Mrs. Gracia Marcel has a statement, a philosophy that she's been promoting, and she works a lot with Theo, that she's been promoting in Africa about amplifying the voices of African women and multiplying the faces of African women. And what that really means is that if we're making a contribution in society, we need to be heard. People need to read about what we're doing. People need to know what our views are. People need to know that we've got a role to play in society. Because the way that power dynamics work is that power is never handed over. It has to be claimed. And I think that what we're not doing is claiming power, our own power as women. And that's why I started by saying we need to be changing our own perceptions about ourselves and what we believe our role needs to be in society.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thanks to all. Maybe a quick new round before we give the floor to the audience. Definitely, I think that what we have gone to is saying that answering to the who we should do the dialogue with, it's definitely everybody, and beginning from the beginning, which is mother with their children or grandchildren. I mean, this is definitely an important starting point. About what I think that all that has been said about changing the narrative and assessing the contribution of women is really something very important. I would say at all levels, political, economic, social. I don't believe in politics or sustainable policy that's not built on interest. Talking about bridging the gap with women or talking about gender parity, it's not only about human rights or a moral duty. It's really a matter of interest. I mean, bringing the women of Africa, understanding how much they contribute indeed to African economy, I think this is a very, very important one, and I would be happy to see how we can practically do that. How can we bring these facts and figures to the common knowledge, not only in Africa, but also in the world. I have only maybe one question, which is, I do think that progress has been made in bridging the gender gap in Africa, as it had been made in global African economic growth. I was wondering whether, and I'd be happy to hear you about this, whether by bridging this general gap between genders, we haven't been, or there isn't a question now of widening the gap within different women in Africa and bringing maybe inequalities or some more inequalities, specifically between rural and urban women, or educated or non-educated women. Maybe, I mean, this is it looks like a secondary issue, but I think these growing inequalities that we now are watching in Africa might be an important issue we need to deal with from the beginning. I mean, all this discussion about inclusivity, equity, equality must probably be brought on from the very beginning. Thank you. So who wants to say something about this?
Thank you. My first point would be that in terms of moving forward and acknowledging the fact that we've made a lot of progress, and it's also part of not telling our story, because even when we're talking about this progress, traditionally, the African woman has always been a major contributor to the economy or to family well-being, not just taking care of the children in terms of economic activities, but those activities were always recognized in the context of the family, and the results were credited to the head of the household, which will always be the man. So she never got recognition in her own right. And in growing in that context, a lot of women haven't even learned to tell their own story, let alone talk about society telling the story. Now, there's something that under an organization that I co-founded in Nigeria, which is called Women in Management and Business, WIMBIZ. We started having these sessions about tooting your own horn. We say to the women, look, if nobody's going to talk about what you've done, you've got to talk about it. And you drop that humility, as I call it, you know, that allows us to act like, oh, every time you are being proposed for something, you say the gentleman is better than you. And therefore, even though you're better qualified than the guy, he gets the job because he's never going to say you're better than him. You know, so being deliberate about the kind of education that we give to the women. I understand about the disparities between levels, even within women, but I'm of the view that everything that's been thrown at women in Africa is generally thrown at the bottom of the pyramid, which means every discussion you're having, UN, every organization, NGOs and all that, is about the woman at the bottom of the pyramid. They're talking about the rural woman. But however, I believe that in life, you use the strongest advantage that you have to drive your goal. I'm a business person. For me, it's economics of use of your assets. The women who are within the middle to up, the women who are more educated and have a higher power of influence, are a higher tool to drive the change. As long as those women, and those type of women are in this room, recognize the responsibility that they have in order to ensure the growth of every woman across the board. Now, in doing that, we have to be deliberate. Like in one of my companies, I was entitled to 3 board positions because of our shareholding in that company. And I chose to have 3 women. I remember the chairman of the board saying to me, I've never sat in a board with so many women. So I said to him, welcome to the new world. Hey, it's my choice. And most times you will find that even as women, we will set up companies, we will appoint a board that will consist of mainly men. And we will be the one woman that is sitting on that board. We're going to have to deliberately move these things. When you sit in it, we have something we're driving now in this organization that I'm part of. We call it WIMBOARD. We're talking about getting women on board. And in doing that, we identified women that we felt were qualified and put them through specific trainings required to be able to get on board, beyond being qualified. Because you can be qualified, but there are many other things. There's visibility, there's specific types of knowledge for areas where the boards are generally looking for people. And then we're working right now on setting up what we call WIMBOARD ambassadors, selecting a group of people that have the power and the positioning to recommend people to those kinds of positions and engaging them so they know the pool of people, so that every time they're being asked, they're pushing, and you're working on this aggressively. Now, what I'm saying is when you use the manpower that you have from medium up, and they have the sense of responsibility that they need to have, they will definitely, at the end of the day, move or fight for policies that would also affect the women that are lower down the ladder. Then there's something that Wendy said that I love, because for me, it's a deliberate action. I'm saying to every woman in this room, we're going to have to be a lot more deliberate than we are right now. When she said, I can never be a man, I wouldn't even try. Now, when I go to any board meeting, I deliberately will never wear a black suit, nor will I wear anything that suggests that you look like a man. When everybody thinks the corporate color to wear is a black or a blue or a gray, I will wear a fuchsia, I would wear a red, I wear pink, and I say to them, yes, there's a pink today. Because I say to them, the young girl of today in an African country thinks she needs to be like a man in order to succeed at a level. And I want to deliberately, in the little things, make her understand I'm every inch a woman. And I always say, ask my husband, he'll tell you. I'm every inch a woman, and I'm successful being a woman, not becoming a man to succeed. And you must be proud first and accept who you are and enjoy your femininity in the process of succeeding. And we have the responsibility of moving that message, which is why the mentoring and all of those role modeling that we've talked about is very key. And telling the African story is our responsibility. I think the international media has not been in love with us. We've been a good market for selling the sad, soppy stories. There are great stories out of Africa. There are great men and there are great women in Africa. And there are great people, great cultures, great things happening. But you don't wait for anybody to give you food if you're hungry. You go after it. We have the stories. We have the capacity. Whatever it takes, what we need to do, we need to fight to get it out in any way that we can save ourselves from the positioning that we have been put into. It's our responsibility, not anybody else. And my challenge is, I challenge every African, woman or man, because even if you're a man, you've got a wife or you've got daughters. I have 3 sons. So I'm not fighting for me anymore, my sons, but I'll have granddaughters or whatever. And then they'll marry the wives that will become my daughters. So whatever fight we're fighting is really about a continent that deserves much more than where it is put right now. Thank you.
And I've learned the lesson never to sit next to you, Widow. I just before I answer Natalie's question, I just wanted to follow up on the question of role models, just with the story that someone told me a couple of weeks ago. In Finland, they've had a woman president for about 8 years now. She's about ready to step down. And apparently, in one of their junior schools, they went and they did a survey with these 10 and 11-year-old children, asking them what they wanted to be. And there was one little boy who just wouldn't say anything. And in the end, they went to him and said, well, you must have something that you want to be. And he said, yes, but I can't be that. And they said, well, what is it? And he said, well, I'd like to be president, but I can't be. And the teacher said, but why? And he said, but don't you know, only women can be president. And it just shows the power. I mean, he'd only ever known women presidents in his lifetime. So that power of role models and what we think we can do and how it either inspires or inhibits us. I think what I wanted to add to the question that Natalie asked, but also to add to what Ibukan was just saying, is to link it back a little bit to the theme of this conference around 360-degree growth. And really wanting us as women and as African women to look at what type of growth it is that we are fighting for. Exactly. Because if we have growth at all costs and growth that doesn't reflect some of our values, some of our principles, some of our visions, then we actually end up in a worse position. So we have got this wonderful story of growth in Africa, really fantastic economic growth, though I think also we forget sometimes about the political growth that we've also seen, as well as some of the areas of social growth. But even if we're looking just at the economic growth, I think there's a real imperative on us as women who have a voice, women who have an influence, women who have a position within this, to turn that growth into growth that we want to see, to turn that growth into growth that would make us happy to leave to our children and our communities and the whole of our nations. So how do we then, as women, truly mold the type of growth that we want to see? We have that power. And so as we're telling our stories, let's tell our stories about exactly what we want to see and where we want to be going. Because at the moment we're talking about this great growth, but that also there's quite pronounced inequity in the growth that is happening. And we all know that the greater the inequity, the more danger there is for the whole of our societies. We have a chance now to influence that growth, to influence the way in which the growth is channeled, to influence the way in which our governments actually protect the most vulnerable in our societies, as well as how they protect the infrastructure and the environment for economic growth, for social development, and for political development. So I would really like to see all of us doing much, much more about turning that growth into growth that we want to see. I'd like us to do much, much more about telling the story of Africa's success, not just in numbers about economic growth, but in terms of the values that lie behind the successes and the achievements of African women, African men, communities on our continent.
Okay. My message is going to be around the responsibility we carry as the women who are sitting on this panel, the women who are sitting here in Deauville. And for me, I think the message I'd like to leave about, in response to Natalie's question about, is there going to be a disparity between those of us who have had the opportunity, have the economic freedom, and the more rural women? And I say the responsibility sits with us who have had the opportunities, who have been given this chance to have a voice, to share, to empower, to give confidence, and more than anything else, to give whatever is required so that the women, share the same thing around economic freedom. When I talk about a country like the one I come from, like Kenya, when you reach the top levels of management, what opportunities do you have? You have the opportunity to do something or to influence the agenda, the social responsibility agenda, which then allows you to be able to create programs that will develop the mentoring or the tools or the ideas that help bridge that gap to economic empowerment. The second thing, and that, by the way, doesn't need to cost anything. The second opportunity we have is how much do we take the responsibility of going to speak to the informal sector, share our learning, our tools. In the corporate world where I am, for example, I work with a board called Enablis, which helps entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and I focus more on the women. And it costs me nothing to do that. But when you sit with a group of women who are just looking to be told, how do I market this product? It costs me nothing to talk to them, to share with them how they can improve their marketing story, their customer base, and everything else. So there's a huge responsibility that we have in terms of how we're able to disseminate whatever it is we have. And the last point I'd like to make is that to Wendy's point, part of the reason why the disparity comes up as well is because if we as women then decide the only way to succeed is to be a man, which means you lose who we are, the empathy, the side of empathy, the aspects of emotion, the aspect of caring, then that's where we fall down. But I don't see that happening as much. And because I know that in our societies, we are not necessarily nucleus. In my home now, I usually stay, for example, with my mother-in-law. I get my aunties coming in. I get a chance to go to the rural areas to visit, because that's the nature of the way we live. We have a lot of family in the rural area. So when I do go to the rural area, the opportunity I take then is to have those conversations that help give the confidence, the ideas, the skills. And I think if we carry that responsibility seriously, then we will narrow this potential gap between economic freedom of the educated vis-a-vis the more informal, less educated, more rural women. So that's a message I'd like to leave.
I also want to echo my view on the question that Natalie has raised for us, which is, are we creating a gap between the different women in Africa and the different strata of women in Africa? And from my perspective and where I sit as the regional director for Africa in UN Women, one of the challenges I've seen is that many a time when we have meetings like this forum, or when we have big events at the UN, at the General Assembly, Commission on Status of Women, you name it, we always go to the same people every time to come and speak on behalf of the women, and to come and talk about, the women in the rural areas. And that's the biggest challenge I've seen since I took on office as the head of Africa. And I said, you know what, I have to change this. It is in my responsibility, as all my colleagues are saying, we all have to take responsibility where we sit and make the change happen. And don't wait for somebody else out there to make the change. And what did I do? Of course, I did the Rural Women's Program. I won't even talk about that, it's a long story. And how I did it is also a long story. I would need a whole day to explain to you how I came up with that Rural Women's Program and what it is doing. But one of the things that I had learned from my previous life before I became Chief of Africa, I was working for, managing a partnership with the World Bank. It's the most difficult partnership and work I have done to work with the World Bank. And so we had a project in Kenya, working with the Maasai women, bead producers. And it was a pilot, as usual. The bank always wants to pilot, and after piloting, they document, and they are gone. I mean, again, I could write a book about my experience working with the World Bank on that initiative that was piloting results-based initiatives for women's economic empowerment. The first challenge I had with the bank, which I had to fight, and I won the battle. Like I said, when I die, I want all of you to say she won a winning battle, because I've always been fighting ever since. When we were designing this project, because it was all scientific and all, as the World Bank is, I said to my partners and to my colleagues at the bank, you know what, if we are going to design projects that are going to be led and managed by rural women, we have to bring them on the table when we are designing the project. We can't sit here as technocrats and experts and speak on their behalf. And my colleague from the bank, who was a man, and a white man, said, excuse me, you're telling me you want to bring the woman from the Maasai woman to this table for us to discuss the indicators, the results, the targets? I said, yes, I want to bring them. And they couldn't believe me. I went to Liberia the same. We were working with women who are producing cassava, women producers. And the same thing, huge challenge to get that consultative process that I wanted to bring to the table. I even phoned my director at some point, then it was Nolene Heiser, all the way from Liberia, Monrovia. I said, Nolene, we are out of this. I can't do this. UNIFEM, we were former UNIFEM then. UNIFEM is not going to do this program and this partnership with the bank if the bank is not going to allow us to bring the voices of the women we are going to work with on the table from the design to the end. And Nolene said, but it's too late. We can't, we have to go on. But I fought the battle, I managed. Of course, I had a very powerful Minister of Gender in Liberia, then Vaba, who made sure it happened. Some of you know Vaba Gelflo very well from Liberia. Anyway, let me end my contribution by saying, for me, the most amazing part of this fight was when I managed to get the Maasai woman to come to New York and speak at an event we were jointly sponsoring with the World Bank. When I said again, now we are beginning to tell the story. As we are all saying, we need to start to tell the story. The idea was we should look at women who are working in the private sector, because we're also working with private sector in Egypt and other countries. So because they are articulate, they can come and speak, because this is a big event, this is the General Assembly, these are big people. I said, you know what, I want to bring the Maasai woman from Kenya. And they said, no, it's impossible. She can't speak English. I said, if it means I'm going to finance and sponsor a translator for her, she will come. I'm going to pay for a translator to come with that Maasai woman. Guess what? We did get a Maasai woman to come. She had no birth certificate. She had no passport. And in 2 weeks, I worked with the Kenya government to get that woman to get a birth certificate, to get a passport, and to get an American visa in 2 weeks. Record time in the history of Kenya. And when that woman came and spoke, I then got one of my program officers in the Nairobi office to accompany her on the trip. It was the first time she has ever been on a plane, and there she is. But you know what? She wowed that room with the way she articulated how this small project had changed her life. Again, that's what I mean. I mean change. That's what I mean, changing the gender dialogue and ensuring that we don't have the gap we are talking about. And you know what I did? What's this company that has this initiative? Excuse me, I have a very bad memory with names. That has the 1,000 Women's Initiative. Yes, Goldman Sachs. Yes, 10,000 women, yes. They were having a big event on Wall Street during that time. I managed to get into that event, and I said, I want my Maasai women to go and market their products in that event. And I took the women to Wall Street, to this big, huge, amazing event. And it was, for me, the happiness, for me, what was on their faces as they walked the walls of Wall Street. I just was so happy because I could see I am making a difference. And that's what I think we all need to do, to begin to bring those women on the table and not speak for them and let them speak for themselves.
It's very true. I think we make many assumptions about what women in communities, because they have no education, are capable or not capable of doing. So your testament I can relate to. There's an organization called Vital Voices that has been doing leadership development of women in developing parts of the world, and they did some study to find out what impact their training had had. And the two things that they found was that women did not really know how to exercise their power. And the second thing that they found was that we are not really in decision-making structures. So a lot of us may be in leadership roles, but if we are not exercising our power in those leadership roles, and we're not part of making decisions in society, our impact is really very limited. So I just thought I'd offer that as a caveat. There's a saying in Africa that says, when we educate a woman, we educate a nation. And I suspect that this is a value for Africa, in my experience. And I suspect that this value finds new applications in society as women succeed. And it really relates to the point that Patricia was making about the responsibility that we have as women, that as we achieve in society, perhaps because we live in a continent that has so many disparities, I think the idea of feeling responsible for women in our society who do not have the means, not necessarily speaking on their behalf, but really creating bridges between opportunities and the needs that they have, is a responsibility that we assume naturally. In South Africa, we have perhaps been a lot more successful, despite inheriting huge disparity from our political past, in making sure that those of us who have been privileged enough to have education do not take it for granted and recognize the responsibility that we have to extend ourselves and open up opportunities for women in our communities to have access to either resources or to opportunities or whatever it is that we can facilitate to improve the quality of their lives. We've done that quite successfully. So I don't think that it's actually an issue that as women in Africa in particular achieve and become successful, they leave the rest of the community behind. I think it's just something that we feel a sense of responsibility for, and that we do quite naturally. the issue that I want to really bring, which we've mentioned but perhaps not discussed fully, is the role of mentorship. You know, and I think that's probably a very specific example of how, as accomplished women in society, we can become available to younger generations and make sure that they don't make the same mistakes. A lot of us in our societies are probably pioneers in some of the things that we've done. And one of the ways that we can give back is to make sure that we mentor young women, that each one of us makes sure that we have a number of women that we're mentoring, that we can help to share our experience so that they can create different experiences for themselves. A society doesn't grow if it doesn't have an institutionalized way or a systemic way of making sure that it passes on experience between the generations. The one other point that I want to mention is the whole idea of creating a network of African women across the continent. In South Africa, we have a lot of African women who work with various institutions, and they are isolated from the South African women. And I think this is a lost opportunity. So I think that as women, and this forum has given us a wonderful opportunity to begin to build those bridges, because I think there's a lot that we can exchange with each other. There's a lot that we can share with each other. We are all doing wonderful things that are really working, you know, so that we begin to create some kind of a model that's sharing best practices. You know, people like Maggie in Burundi are doing unbelievable work in communities, and we can learn from each other. And rather than reinvent the wheel, replicate, so that our ability to multiply the impact of our contribution is maximized. The final thing that I want to mention, which is probably will not have enough time for discussion, is the whole idea of the emasculation of young boys. That in finding a place for ourselves in society, we should be mindful that we don't do that in a way that emasculates young men. In South Africa, this is a debate that men are already raising, that they feel that they no longer have a role because women have earning power, are making decisions about our lives, you know, so it's having other impact in society that we may not even be thinking about, that in trying to find a place for ourselves in society, we are displacing men. And I think we don't really want to do that. So we need to just be mindful that we do that in a way that really identifies what our role is without displacing the role of men in society.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe now it's time to take questions from the audience. Does anybody want to throw the first one?
Hi, my name is Pindo from South Africa. Just a question on the comment that was made earlier on about teaching the young girl while she's still very young about how to become smart and behave in the manner that we're painting for them. The question that has been in my mind is, what about the older woman who is already a mother-in-law and has different expectations from the young girl?
Maybe we can take all the questions and answer all together.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. There's only one mic? No, there's one mic.
I have another one.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dumi Mahabo. I would like to hear a little bit more, perhaps as an extension to the previous question, around older women in our society. I feel that we have a lot of consciousness and awareness about younger girls coming up. Yes, indeed, we don't have the mechanisms in place to support them. However, we have an older generation which I'm starting to feel like we alienate in many ways. There's a lot of lessons that we could learn, and I'd like to hear a little bit of your thoughts on how we begin to change the dialogue around the older women in our society and how we can reconnect in a way that is actually going to be useful and in a way that's going to educate us coming up as well. Thank you.
I just wanted to raise the question, which, in fact, two of you did, about the role of the media in putting out the story. And I'm just wondering what initiatives or efforts are being made to try and convince local conventional media, newspapers, for example, in Kenya, to assume more responsibility of reporting locally, particularly given the fact as well that the international media is reneging more and more on covering Africa. I'm saying this as an editor and journalist as well, I know it very well. So I think the answer has to come probably from local African journalists, but I think they need to be aware of this, and I'm wondering what initiatives you take perhaps as companies or as organizations in trying to get local journalists on board to sort of go out on a limb to report the story from, say, the Maasai in the rural areas, or to get particularly what women are thinking and feeling in rural areas.
Maybe last one, two last one before.
Okay, thank you, Marie-Roger Biloa. Thank you for the very, very inspiring insights. I wanted to echo on what Wendy said about men and young males, that sometimes our action to fight for our own place in society might alienate them. This is a very important issue, and if you can say something about your own relationship to men, maybe in business, but also especially on your private life as a struggling woman, do you feel that problem rising, that maybe men feel emasculated, as you said, and how do you deal with it? How do you go about it? Thank you.
The last one, maybe two last one.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd just like some commentary on resolving some of the things I've heard. So the issue of remaining women, the issues of transforming processes with the World Bank, etc. The issue of moving into a traditional patriarchal institution and not behaving like the man. And then with critical mass, we begin to transform that institution, and that is very threatening to men. So that comes back to the comment that you were just making about emasculating. And at that point, men are very threatened, even though emasculating is not our intention. We're not, you know, as the very early comments were, we're not there to behave like men, we don't want to be men, but our presence sometimes, and particularly in significant numbers, begins to be very threatening. So it follows up, I think, a little from the question that was just asked. I'm sitting here with all these ideas swirling, and I can't see how patriarchs can't be threatened in this context.
I'll answer some, not all of them. Let me start with the alienation of men. what we've seen in South Africa is that there are increasing levels of violence against women, which did not exist before we became a democracy. And that's a clear indication of the frustration that men must be experiencing and really not knowing how to deal with women who have become assertive and do not really depend on them for financial means. You know, the dynamics are changing, and I think in our case, they kind of change very suddenly. You know, we have a generation of men that we're not really prepared for it, but perhaps our children will not really struggle with it because they will grow up in a society where there's gender equality, or at least an aspiration to achieve gender equality. So that's really how I know that this is really becoming an issue that we have to address and find a way of dealing with it. The issue about intergenerational conversations that was raised by Tumi, I couldn't agree with you more. We need to, in my life, I have friendships with women who are 20 years younger than I am and women who are 20 years older than I am. And I've always done that. So in my personal life, I practice that because I recognize the value of learning from younger women and learning from older women. And I think I would recommend that it's something that we should all practice if we're not already doing it. Doing it at a large scale, I think, would be very useful. I'm not quite sure how we do that. One of the things that I did, a friend of mine's daughter was getting married, and I offered for the friends of the mother to sit with the daughter and to prepare her for marriage, because one of the things we don't prepare our girls for marriage. You know, so their only experience of marriage is the experience of their parents. And I think it would be enormously valuable to sit with the daughters of our friends and share what it's been like for us to be married, so that they can go into marriage with their eyes wide open. So I agree with you, there would be huge value in that. On the role of media, media wants to sell newspapers, as you know. And they don't believe the work that women are doing in society has value. In fact, Marilyn, I'm hoping that she can share with us. I just absolutely enjoyed her contribution on her panel about just relying on GDP as a measure and an indicator of economic growth and completely disregarding the other contributions that exist in society. And women make a huge value, they make a huge contribution in society that is not valued. You know, so how could we begin to develop a measure that values the contribution that women are making so that newspapers can find the contribution that women are making interesting? The second challenge with the question that we are raising is that in most cases women don't want to be in the media. They don't really want to be interviewed. You know, and that's why I made the point earlier in my remarks that we really need to find the courage to shape opinions, to bring our ideas into media, to talk about what we're doing. Because if we ourselves are not driving that, we can't really expect the journalists to run around looking for us. We need them to know that we exist through the work that we do, through the actions that we represent in society.
Yes, maybe you just, yeah. I would like to just attempt to add to Wendy on the first two questions that are talking about the older generation of females in our societies as opposed to the younger ones. What my thinking is that we have a better option or a better, we have better strategies to change the younger women because they are really growing up in a totally different society. The older women, yes, we can also have strategies to engage them and bring them on board. The challenge we have with the older women in many instances, and this is from my personal experience as well, and also from working on the issues of ending violence against women in Africa, is that there is this misnomer about cultural and traditional values of a woman versus a man that makes it very difficult to change the thinking of both the men and the women who are from the older generation. However, one of the things we have begun to see in recent years is that even some of those values, for example, female genital mutilation, which in traditional practice is done by older women. And therefore, they see it as something that has to be done and cannot be changed. But we are beginning to see, with a lot of advocacy, with a lot of awareness raising, that uses tools and technologies that make the older women realize the impact of that practice on their own daughters and granddaughters has really begun to change those grandmothers, those older women, and that traditional practice that they thought is supposed to be done. And you wouldn't even start to talk to them about. In West Africa, we are seeing a lot of progress, or in some countries where really it's becoming into law, and it's also practically, there is practical experience where older women, grandmothers are now actually saying, no, we don't do this anymore to our granddaughters or to our daughters. So I think there is a way of addressing it. It's much harder. It needs different strategies than the younger ones, but there is tools we can begin to use. And I think that's the message I'll probably want to share at the end.
Thank you very much.
I'll address two. This older generation dialogue that you raised to me. In Kenya, there's something they call the chamas. Chamas are associations which originally, she's smiling, which originally started as forums for women, groups of women, sometimes like-minded, sometimes not as like-minded, to talk about anything. It could be economic, it's about the family, it could be a whole load of things. But increasingly what you're finding is that in these chamas or these groupings, which is the biggest groupings now, even banks are creating products to help serve these chamas and these groupings, is that the older women in particular are using them to discuss issues that affect them, to share thoughts, to share ideas. If I look at a group, my mother's chama is called the grandmothers. They call themselves the grandmothers chama because they're all grandmothers and everything else. For them, it's not about pooling in their resources. It's about sharing ideas. What is going on with our children? Have you done this? What advice would I give? You know, what did you do when this happened? And within that, I think amongst themselves, they're beginning to create this dialogue which allows them to have a forum where they can discuss things which maybe if they were left alone or in a family setting, they would not be able to, because there isn't the fusion of ideas from the other members of that particular group. So increasingly, you're finding that these chamas are becoming a forum which drive a lot of the agenda. In fact, some of them even right now invite younger generations, like I'll use the example, my mother's, for example, where they invite us to come and tell them, what is this thing called Facebook? And please tell us and show us how to use Facebook. A year ago, we showed all of them how to get an email account. And they now all can use email, because in Kenya, the biggest thing's mobile, and everybody has a mobile and they can use that. So I think it's things like that which will begin to help create forums or that allow them to vent and share what are the issues affecting them and the generations, etc. The other point I'd like to share is this thing about the role of media, and I know you talked about it in Kenya. Kenya, we have a significant challenge with respect to our media. And as Wendy said, what do newspapers do? They sell. And bad stories, unfortunately, sell better than good stories. And I'll just share my experience in two things that I've been involved in. I sat on the Brand Kenya board. I actually helped set up a Brand Kenya board, which is the authority to help develop marketing on Kenya. And I also sat on the Kenya Tourism Board. And one of the things that we developed is trying to get the media to come to a point where we say that, listen, fair enough, spend 60% of your newspaper on politics, on the bad news, but start to give or dedicate a particular amount of the newspaper to the good stories. And increasingly, we're beginning to do that. And the next thing was about finding journalists and editors who understand the story and working with them. One of the big media houses, for example, the second largest in Kenya now, has a very pro-positive editor who we've worked with from that perspective, but also worked with from my corporate perspective with some of the programs we have, like the L'Oreal Women in Science, and tell the good stories around that. And she started these magazines in the newspaper, which started at 2 pages. Now the magazines are what, 6 pages? Yeah? And the focus always is around the good stories of what is going on. Initially, she started focusing on women, starting from the girl to there's Eve girl, there's Eve woman. But now increasingly, she's starting to talk about the other positive economic stories around Kenya. And it's getting a following, because at the end of the day, people are getting really tired of always reading the bad news, of, you know, predicting which political person is going to be in the headline tomorrow. And unfortunately, all it does, it reduces your circulation, so it's working against what you were trying to do. So that, I think, for me, is something that is an ongoing project, and, you know, it's something that has to be dealt with a continuous engagement, otherwise it's not going to happen. And then the story around the boy child, it's really interesting because in Kenya, the girl child agenda was very big. For years and years and years, we have done a lot of work around the girl child. And the point is, we're getting to the same situation as in South Africa now, where you're finding that people are saying, you know, the violence against women is increasing. And the reason being because, you know, men are beginning to feel emasculated. So there are 2 things that I think are going to be the next discourse or discussion in Kenya. It's around how first we increase the sensitivity of women so that they also become inclusive, but how do we start to rebuild the confidence again in men, and so they stop feeling threatened by this new empowerment and strength of women in the country.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And that's true. Now, you know, there are a couple of things that I want to say. To me, I couldn't agree with you more about older women, and I think that the issue about not telling stories applies to them as well. We're sitting here at this table. We wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be here in this audience if it hadn't been for older women who made decisions within the family about whether to educate a girl or not to educate a girl. And there are older women who have got really strong, powerful stories to tell. And in the same way as sometimes we think, oh, well, the next generation's got it a little bit easier because we've had women who've broken glass ceilings. Well, the same things were true for our mothers and for our grandmothers, but we're not telling those stories. And I know I wouldn't, the thing I remember about my grandmother was her telling me when I was age 10, look, you'll make lots of decisions that I won't agree with in your life. It's up to you. But one thing I'm telling you is, before you get married, have enough money to buy your own house so that when he gives you trouble, you can kick him out. But you know, we are not telling our grandmother's stories or our great-grandmother's stories in the way we're not telling our own. So we do need to actually do that and really be cross-generational. Now, the thing I want to say about this issue about masculinity may not be, or emasculation may not be very popular. But what I want to say is this. 2 things. For me, women's rights and women's rights issues are part of a social justice agenda, and they always have been. And I want to see an Africa and a world in which all people actually are living with the rights to which they have, you know, they should hold and that they should have. It's about equity and it's about social justice. But when we start challenging patriarchal societies, you have to expect that there will be some kind of backlash. Because in the same way as when we were fighting for independence in Africa, in the same way as when our grandparents and great-grandparents were fighting slavery on the continent, people do not want to give up power easily, and particularly when there's a vision of that power somehow being limited. So I absolutely agree that we have to look at an inclusive way in which we look at power and the way in which power is distributed. But I have to tell you that I go through the continent, and I go not just Africa, actually. I go through the world, and I see what happens in Europe and what happens in North America and what happens in different places. We are not at a place where girls get the same choices as men. We are not at a place where men can say that we are emasculating them because somehow we are saying that women deserve the rights that they deserve. And so, yes, I don't want to emasculate anyone because I don't believe that anyone should effeminize. What's it? Should defeminize me. I want to be a woman and I want my right to be a woman. But I do not want to sit there and when I go to the DRC and see what's happening to women there, when you look at the levels of rape and sexual violence against women in America, this is not just about women's power or Africa or where we've reached. So let's not stand back and say, oh, we can't actually push for equity because we might emasculate men. Let us say that as women, we have a different take of power, and we can push for social justice and social equity and an agenda which means that we will have an Africa that we are proud to be a part of. Let's not allow people to say divide and rule. We can't have women's empowerment unless we have male emasculation. I do not believe that. I will never believe it. And sorry. And just the final thing about media, I agree with what's been said very much about media, but also, you know what, let's make use of other forms of media on our continent. Nollywood. I know that everybody here who says that they've never watched a Nollywood film is lying, is lying. And you know, I really do think, let's look at other forms of media. Let's see if other media will tell the good stories that, you know, that newspapers might never tell because of their own, you know, economic and other agendas. So, and let's look at magazines. Let's look at books. You know, we've got publishers. Let's look at how, so let's look at a whole range of media because it's not always possible to change someone else's agenda as quickly as we want to change it. And I know that Nollywood does not do the best portrayals of African women, but I really believe that we can work with them to really help them change that portrayal. And also then to get this discussion, this conversation beyond those of us who've been really privileged and educated, etc. Because more people, more grassroots women, whether they're in the rural areas or in the urban areas, watch Nollywood than listen to the news. And so if we can have that discussion happening amongst a greater number of women and men and girls and boys throughout the continent, I think we'll be able to push our agenda and push this thing of a changed narrative much, much quicker.
Now I have nothing to say. But anyway,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you add something, and maybe if, because I think that the time now is short, if you had 2 action points that you would like to be put forward, can you please
add
say
it.
them after?
Okay, first, I'd like Letty and the UN, as part of your funding agenda, to set up a website on African women. And across all the 38 or 40 African countries, find your role models and women that you want to help to encourage the next generation of women at different levels and put them there. Because the people you want to inspire, that's where they live. And you're in a position more than individual countries or organizations to do a coordinated thing. And we can begin to document. There's something, you can work with them on that. So that's one action point. We'll ask you at the next Women's Forum for the results. Okay. There's something we did at Women in Management and Business. First, what we've always done for all our annual conferences, and we've been doing this for 10 years, is at each conference, the chair of the conference is an older, accomplished woman from the country. The first one, we had Louisa Majela from South Africa. But after that first conference, we decided that we will find the next, because the women who created WIMBase are all in a particular generation, we decided we would look for the next generation, the women who made it possible for us to be able to sit around the table. And we will always find one extremely accomplished older woman to chair the conference and manage the process and keep sharing experiences across the board. And then this year, last year I think, we did something. We created a coffee book and we called it Inspire Me. In Inspire Me, we have the stories of 178 women, and we did them by generations. And we also went across different industries, from the ordinary to extraordinary. And we wanted to give them a voice and to give them a face. And in documenting it, we decided it would sit in every Nigerian embassy across the globe, and we will sell it into every corporate organization so that it's sitting, and then we sold it to individuals. And that became our volume 1, because we intend to continue to document. For us, that would be something we can extend into an African-wide thing, but it's stronger at national levels. If you take it country by country and you start this kind of thing, you would be surprised what you would do. A few years ago, I started a work called The Girl Entrepreneurs, Our Stories. And we're working on the second book now. The first was just 11 Nigerian women, with half of my story as part of it. And it's going to be a series. Book 2 is almost ready. And I'm looking forward to an African-wide one that includes the stories of many African female entrepreneurs. Why? Because I get the question all the time. How did you do this? How do you manage the home, the work, and the whatever, and the rest of your life? You can never meet every girl and every other woman that needs to ask you those questions. And I realized a book can travel faster. Same as searching on the internet can give the information a lot faster than I can. Alienating the men. Listen, if there's anybody that is positioned to rightly manage all fronts and make a success of it more than any other woman on the globe, it's the African woman. And I say that with all sense of responsibility, because the way we're brought up, what we need to do is share information that allows us to learn how to win on all fronts. For me, winning is winning on all fronts. I can be successful as a career woman, but I love being a wife. And I also love being a mother. So for me, success is succeeding in all my personal ambitions, but also succeeding as a wife to my husband and a mother to my 3 sons. And how I work that out for every woman is different. Now, when people say, you travel so much, how do you get your husband to agree? I said, it's for me to know and for you to find out. Now, why do I say that? Every husband is different. When Wendy said we don't teach our children about marriages, we actually need to start to teach them about how to choose the husband. Yes. Because your spouse is a key success factor, and when you teach the girl, she's not going to fall in love with being a princess for one day at a wedding. She's going to look for the man that can work with her vision, her personal vision for her life, and support and encourage her to be herself. Now, a woman is the most strategic human being I know. She knows how to make a man do what she wants or get him to agree to what she wants, whilst he thinks he's the one making you do what he wants. That's part of the knowledge we need to keep sharing. So we can do this. We just need to work it through. Okay.
Okay, we're beginning red card. We won't even do that. I'll just say AWDF would be really happy to work with UN Women on the website for African women. And that's it.
My 2 actions, each one of us, let's take whatever number, 1, 2 women who we choose and we mentor and we say we're going to help take them along their journey of life. That for me is the most important thing.
Just one word to add. This is Women Leading Africa. It's just about conversations with leading African women, Volume 1.
Action point, each and every one of us in this room, nominate a woman to be on a board or to be on a conference, and when you do so, look for a rural woman and grandmother, a young woman, an entrepreneur, all walks of life. Take that responsibility. Nominate a woman to be on some kind of board or decision-making body from today onwards. And if we do that, next time we meet next year, there will be so many women who are making a difference in the world.
I don't have one. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We are on time, almost. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you.